When people say she loves herself, it's seen as an insult. But she's like, what's the option? That I don't love myself? What's the option? Like, why can't we be seen to be shouting about how great we are? Men don't seem to have quite as much of a problem about this as women do. Failure is not an option. And all of these things kind of makes me a very hard worker and a great member of a corporate team, but it doesn't make me great at promoting myself. So when I moved into running my own business, I still clung to that hope that my wonderful work would be enough and it would speak for itself. But as I say to my clients, your work doesn't have a voice. You do. So we need to kind of step up as business owners and business leaders and not be afraid to speak about the work that we're doing. And how do we get that message out with that in a way that doesn't make us feel icky, in a way that doesn't feel like self-promotion, but actually we're talking about the impact that we can make.
Today, we're going to talk about really leaning in to who you are. So if you've ever been told that you were too much, or you've ever been told that you were too loud, if you were too afraid to own your full expression, then that's what we're going to talk about today, because there's so much conditioning and belief systems that we bring into our business that really hold us back. And I've invited Sapna Pieroux to talk to us today and really dive into this topic with us. So Sapna, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about really reclaiming the parts of us that we think, and I'll put that in air quotes, that we think that we need to hide to show up professionally, to show up in the certain way that we think business owners need to show up. What parts of yourself did you feel like you needed to hide to be taken seriously in business?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I started the first 20 years of my life were in corporate, not of my life, obviously, not when I was 0 years old.
Your working life.
All my working life, I started in corporate for the first 20 years. And so there's a certain part of like having to fit in, like have to be part of a team. You're a cog in a machine to a certain degree. And so, if you don't behave a certain way, you can get that quashed, whether people think that you're not, kind of representing the company in a certain way. Or I think things have changed over the years where with diversity and inclusion measures coming into play, that individuality is more kind of embraced. But I think there are still cultures where you do have to, fit in with the way that the company values and the way that the company operates to a certain degree to be a part of this machine. And then, of course, there are, kind of hierarchical things where, sometimes I've been told by managers that, I was maybe too talkative, or it's kind of like know your place.
Yes, yes.
If your manager comes, I was talking to a friend the other day actually, and she's really bright. She's been in her career for nearly 30 years. She's still got a manager who wants the debrief of her research before they go into a meeting. So then she like claims it as her own. And her manager's doing this, and she's just like getting so infuriated by the fact that her manager's claiming her work. So there's this need to be seen and need to take the credit. So I think, yeah, there are parts of our personality that we end up having to dial down to fit into the machine. But I think when you own your own business, your own business owner, I think that mindset has to change. And by trying to fit in, you're not going to stand out. I'm a brand consultant, so I work with business owners on their business brands and on their personal brands now as well, and help people to actually show up as more as their true self so that they can grow their personal brand and make that human connection with people. So I think things are changing.
Mm, mm. What do you see from the people that you work with? How do you see leaders, business owners shrinking themselves to fit into this model of what they think business owners should be?
I think it's conditioning. I think for a lot of us, we're told these stories as we're growing up, and especially as women, I think we get
Mm,
told like nobody likes to show off. Women especially shy away from talking about their achievements for not wanting to be seen as braggy or, kind of a show off or like too big. She's too big for her boots. Oh, she loves
yeah.
herself. She loves herself. I saw a great post the other day. I think it was a lady called Sophie Lee who I follow on LinkedIn. And she said, when people say she loves herself, it's seen as an insult.
Mm-hmm.
But she's like, what's the option? That I don't love myself? What's the option that she's too full of herself. She's like, what's the option? That I'm only half full of myself?
Mm,
Or
right.
I'm empty. Like, why can't we be seen to be shouting about how great we are? Men don't seem to have quite as much of a problem about this as women do. But I mean, I work with men and women, and with the personal brand work that I do, it is about letting people lean into what makes them amazing, what makes them different, what makes them impactful. And I kind of have to tell them that building the personal brand is not just about, it's not about ego, it's about making that impact. It's about standing out so that people can understand the amazing work you do, the impact that you're having, and can understand the difference that you can make to the world.
Mm. What I found really interesting when you were talking about that is as an adult, it's like, of course, we should be loving ourselves because when we love ourselves and we accept ourselves fully, that's when, we're able to show up and we're able to show up with our cup filled and giving to our clients from the overflow. But I had this little flashback of being in primary school in the schoolyard, and that oh, you love yourself. That is actually what we used to say to be not very nice to other people in the schoolyard. We say, oh, you love yourself. And I'd never really, until you said that, actually remembered that I even did that. But it's those parts of us that we sometimes don't even remember. Sometimes we do know, but sometimes we don't even remember that we're bringing through into our business.
Absolutely. It's conditioning, it's messages. I mean, this research shows that women, we underestimate our power and we underplay ourselves. And if there's a job advertisement out there, so men will look at a job ad and there's only like, 60 or 70% of
Mm,
it that they can hit and they will go, right, I'll go for that. Whereas women will kind of go, can I do 100%? Like we second guess ourselves.
100%. I've seen that so often.
Yeah. And so it's the same with, if you hear these messages of like, oh, she loves herself, she's too full of herself, we end up doubting ourselves. Am I too much? Am I,
Mm,
we kind of dial down the brilliance,
mm,
if you like. And some of the women that I'm working with, and as I say, I do work with women and men, but on my cohort at the moment, it's 8 women. And this story just keeps playing out over and over again. And I ask people to write their origin story. You talked about when you're at primary school, these messages that we get told as a child in the playground. Like I got shouted at by a boy. There's a talk I give, and I talk about the fact when I got shouted at, and it was like, chocolate across the playground in an abusive kind of way. He was making
mm-hmm,
fun of me. It just kind of it made me kind of shrink back because I was just like, I just wanted to look like everyone else. I didn't want to stand out. I didn't, I wanted to have the blonde hair and the white skin
mm,
and the freckles, just like my friends. So it set up this pattern in my head of like, just shrink back, don't show yourself, don't, blend in as much as you can, which being a person of color is kind of harder to do. But it's also the messages that, like, my dad, sort of said, you'll have to work twice as hard in this country to have half a chance. And so it's these messages that, like, well, like, I
mm-hmm,
can't overachieve in a way. I'm like such a perfectionist and I overachieve and I can't fail. Failure is not an option. And all of these things kind of makes me a very hard worker and a great member of a corporate team. But it doesn't make me great at promoting myself because
mm-hmm,
other people would take that credit. So when I moved into the business, into, running my own business, I still clung to that, hope that my wonderful work would be enough and it would speak for itself. But as I say to my clients, your work doesn't have a voice. You do.
mm,
So
mm,
we need to kind of step up as business owners and business leaders and not be afraid to speak about the work that we're doing. And that's kind of some of the work that I do with my clients is helping them coach. How do we get that message out with that, in a way that doesn't make us feel icky, in a
mm-hmm,
way that doesn't feel like self-promotion, but actually we're talking about the impact that we can make.
mm. I find this really interesting because this is something that I've experienced, and I would want to know if this is something that you've experienced with your clients as well, is that often the genius zone that we have and those really
Mhm.
special gifts that we bring, we often don't even notice they're almost invisible to us. Is that something you notice with your clients? And then how do people even bring that out when they're not even aware that these things are their zones of genius?
Well, it was funny that you just said, oh, there's that thing that I remembered from my primary school days. And, when we were talking about that and it's like, and you start joining the dots. So yeah, I mean, the Daniel Priestley, the business coach who's an
Mm-hmm.
Australian guy actually, but he's based in the UK now. He talks about mountain of value. Like we don't know what mountain of value we are stood on.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of stuff that we know and our experience, because when you're on a mountain, you end up looking at everybody else, all the other mountains. You don't realize how high your own mountain is.
Mm,
Across and you kind of like see their mountain. Oh my God, they're on a really high mountain. They know all this stuff. So a lot of the work that I do with clients is about working out what their value is, but and actually, yes, digging back, I get them to write their origin story and kind of talk about like when they were little and like what got them into the thing that they were doing and where was the spark, like what sparked it. They start digging and realizing how they show. And one of my ladies went, oh my gosh, from writing her story, she was like, I realize now why I avoid conflict. I realize now why I've always taken a backseat. I realize now why my clients first, but she's a wallflower, like she's a real, like hides behind the work that she does. And she's trying to transition from one role, which is kind of a massage therapist. And of course, like when you're a massage therapist, you very much your client is the focus. Whereas she wants to move into coaching other massage therapists. So she has to step into a leadership role. And this is
mm-hmm.
some, work that she's having to reposition herself in her head and start thinking and talking about herself in a different way. So that's kind of part of the work that we're doing together.
I love that. You talked a little bit about being in corporate for quite a while. I think you said
Mm,
20 years.
yeah.
What did you need to do to move into the role that you're in? What did you have to overcome? And how did you know how to set yourself so that you were in your category and owning that?
Well, yeah, when I first started, it was like kind of like it was an accidental business.
Ugh, I love these stories.
I stopped my 20 years in corporate after I had my second child. So I've got two boys, Luke and Leon is just 12 now. So I kind of stopped after I got postnatal depression actually. So that pause was enforced. And by that point, I had a baby and a toddler, and my husband was starting his business. So we made a decision between us that I was going to be a stay-at-home mum for the foreseeable, whilst letting him then just push ahead with his business and get completely absorbed in that. Because I'm a designer, I created his brand and his branding, created his brochure. That was seen at an entrepreneurial event and held up by the speaker, Daniel Priestley's dad, actually, Andrew Priestley, who's another business coach, as the gold standard. So Andy came home that day with 7 business cards of people who wanted to work with me. And I was like, oh my God, what's this? And he went, that's your new business. Now I was studying to be an interior designer at the time. So I was just like, oh. And then I thought, I could start an interior design company with 0 clients, or I could realize that with my design background and marketing and advertising and communications skills, that I could
Mm-hmm.
help entrepreneurial businesses level up. And I'd worked with big global brands before, like L'Oreal and Sony Ericsson and Mercedes. And it was like I could take that big brand experience and help smaller brands. So that's what I ended up doing. And it took me a while to build my own brand because again, I was just kind of in service. I wasn't thinking about myself. I was like doing the work. But of course, you end up doing it at a relatively low hourly rate because you don't have faith in yourself. You kind of look at what the industry is charging and you go, right, well, I'll charge that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, you're just a worker bee, as Daniel would say. You're just kind of doing the thing, but not actually building a business and not actually building your own personal brand. So it's really hard to then stand out. And you become a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
And a commodity buy, nobody values commodity. So I actually took a lot of these clients that I was working with were part of Daniel's program because my husband was on Daniel's program, Key Person of Influence. And so I was working with a lot of these KPIs, as we call ourselves. And Daniel said to me himself, he was like, you need to be doing KPI because you are working with my clients. You may as well do KPI. So I resisted it for a while because I didn't have the confidence actually. And I was like, I'm not ready.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not ready. And then eventually I kind of went, right, I am ready. And with the KPI program, you learn again how to articulate your value, what your actual value is, what it is that you do for clients. And part of the program was about writing a book, like one of his 5 Ps is published. And I kind of joined KPI because I always thought there's a book in me and I wanted to get that book out. And before I'd done KPI, people said to me, how do you do what you do? Because I created magical results for clients. I was like, I can't, I just sort of shrugged my shoulders and say 25 years experience and intuition. And I couldn't really work out what I was doing or how I was doing it or in what order. But writing the book really helped me break down my process into
Mm-hmm.
6 steps. And I was like, right, so now I've got the vision process and I can take business owners through a set of steps to help build their brand. It helps give people a beginning, middle, and end to my process. It helps me charge more, well, charge what it's worth, because actually they can see this defined outcome. It gives me a point of difference in the market, not just the fact that I've got the vision process, but I've got an award-winning book as well. So suddenly you start pulling yourselves out of kind of that commodity buy because you can
Mm-hmm.
articulate your value better, you have a process, you have, you're award winning, and you can guarantee results for clients. So
Mm.
that's kind of part of the process that I went on. And it's something that I help my clients do as well, kind of articulate their value and understand how they're going to stand out in their industry.
I love that. What shifts do you notice or see or even use yourself to help someone to really reclaim their full self? Because anyone, you talked about commodities, and I think that people that are commodities have, I guess the way I would describe it is maybe a shallow brand, but really it's what you're talking here is about getting really deep. And even before you're layering in sort of those processes, really understanding who you fully are. What are some of those, behind the scenes shifts that you've seen, maybe in their messaging, maybe in their content, maybe in their brand?
Well, the personal brand side of my business is a very new part of my business. So we're kind of working with these women at the moment. They're going through these shifts right now. We're sort of halfway through the program. It's a 6-month program. So at the moment, they're all works in progress. Well, we're all works in progress all the time, aren't
Oh,
we? Um,
totally.
So what I'm seeing already though is that people firstly like showing up at all. Like, some people weren't posting and they weren't showing up for their businesses and they just weren't visible. My whole thing is that you cannot see what you cannot buy, or you can't buy what you cannot see. So you
Yeah.
have to get visible because if people can't see you, they won't know about the work that you do. So for
Yeah.
a lot of these women, it's almost giving them permission to show up, to talk about their work and to talk about the struggles they've overcome, to share a bit about their journey, to go a little bit deeper. So I can see like my clients are now talking about what got them into what they're doing, and people want to connect. People love stories, and it's giving them permission to tell their story and not feel that they're being full of themselves and that they love themselves too much. But a big part of personal brand is about people understanding what it would be like to work with you as well. So it's about sharing those stories about your clients. It's about sharing testimonials. A lot of them, they have so many wonderful clients and they do so much for their clients, but they're not telling those stories. And one of the first steps that I say with my clients is if you're not telling those stories, like if you feel icky about talking about yourself, let your clients do that. So
Mm-hmm.
share the stories that your clients are talking about you, and they can tell the world how wonderful you are in a way
Yeah.
that you don't feel comfortable doing it.
Mm. How about people that are in niches or industries where clients actually don't feel comfortable about sharing? So maybe, like, what am I thinking? Maybe like some sort of financial services or investing or these kinds of industries. What do you suggest for those people?
you can always have anonymous quotes. You can have Sarah from Sheffield or whatever. You don't have to put the full name. You could put, CEO of like a major, multinational or something like that. You don't have to, and people will understand that, but in some areas, anonymity is important. But as long as you can prove, the results that you're getting for clients, I think people are still interested in the stories because they want to
Mm,
know how it will work for me. Like they want to know,
mm.
oh, I've got, even if it's like, we had this client and they had this problem and then we solved it. They kind of want to know those stories.
Yeah, totally. Because that's how they see themselves in the story. Because
Yeah, and it's about talking about them.
totally, at the end of the day, what we're thinking is, will this outcome work for us? That's
Yeah.
essentially what
How can they
everyone's
help
thinking, right?
me? And I'm always saying
Yeah.
that people don't care about buying your shit. They don't care about buying your shit. They care about, is it going to solve my problem? What's in it for me? What's in it for me? And that's something that, we've got to flip that story as well. Again, when, it's the balance of building your personal brand. People want to know what it's like to work with you, but actually you've got to make it about your clients as well and make it relevant to, them thinking, well, do I want to spend time with this person? Because are they going to be able to help me?
Totally. So if someone's listening and they're thinking, oh my goodness, this is me. I've been holding back. I'm really struggling to, I guess, get myself out in depth in a way that's deep. I was struggling where to go with deep or depth there, but most people are showing up, but they're not really feeling like they're getting a deep connection with their audience. What is the first thing that you would invite them to either explore or to do?
I think for a lot of people that are showing up and not finding that connection with their audience, there's a couple of things. They probably don't understand their audience and their audience's deepest worries and fears enough, or they're not talking about them enough. They're not talking, they're not putting out content and showing up where people kind of go, oh, I really, she gets me. Like she gets me, or he gets me. And then the other thing is for people to kind of connect with you on a personal level. So sharing a little bit about your story without necessarily oversharing. Some of my clients have been through some quite traumatic things in their past, and I always sort of say, you don't have to share what makes you feel uncomfortable at all.
Mm-hmm,
You don't have to put pictures of your children on social media if you don't want
mm-hmm,
to do that. It's not about building your personal brand is not necessarily about getting too personal or oversharing, but it's about giving people a little peek behind the curtain as to who you are, why you do the thing that you do, why you're so passionate about it. And, Simon Sinek says start with why. And I think when people understand your why, they kind of feel more connected to your story as well and what kind of drives you. I think also when you have talked about things you've overcome in your past, that's another connection point because there are other people that might be struggling with that at that time. And so that is another level of giving them hope and being inspiring. And, I don't know if we talked about this before, but I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2022. And I talk about this when, as part of my talk, but my book's called Let's Get Visible. And it took me a while to understand that visibility was so key to showing up. Famously, I talk about the fact that I almost put a white man's name on my book cover because I thought the book would do better than if,
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And it was an actual conversation I had with my publisher because, well, I'd also read the research that women's business books don't do as well as men's. They get reviewed more harshly, they sell for less money, and they're not taken as seriously. So I thought by putting a white man's name on my cover, the book would do better. So she talked me out of
And
that.
I was going to say you didn't, did you? You're like,
No, she told me off and said I was being incredibly silly. So yeah, but I mean, there was that level of not imposter syndrome, but it was like that. I was so terrified of getting visible myself
mm,
that I understand. That's the point. The reason I tell the story is that it shows that I understand my clients' fears. Like I was so
mm-hmm.
scared that I put ego aside and I was like, look, I'll give this to somebody else. Like somebody else can do. But it was also tapping back to how I was in corporate, right? I was like doing the work and I've just made that connection right now talking to you, Samantha, that I was quite happy to not be at that front line taking the credit for things. Other people would take the credit for it. And that was probably quite conditioned into the way that I was and the way that I wasn't showing up. So part of what I do with my clients is, give them the permission to do that and give them the encouragement to do that, to step out and to step into the spotlight so that people can actually, kind of connect with them on a much deeper level. Telling those stories makes people go, my God, like that was me. And the cancer thing was, just to go back to that, was, well, I could have then just shrunk away. And of course I was terrified, like, it's a
Hmm.
life-threatening situation and I had to look after my children and kind of manage their mentality around it. But I chose visibility. I chose to stay visible and to use my voice and the platform that I built to talk about breast cancer, to raise awareness, to raise money, raise thousands. And actually staying visible then was something that gave me purpose. Point when I wasn't running my business because I'd kind of stepped back from that, it kind of gave me purpose that I could then help others. And I had so many people connect with me from all over the planet saying, thank you for demystifying it. Thank you for talking about it because I'm too ashamed. Like a lady actually said she was ashamed of her breast cancer
Mm.
and that she was too ashamed to tell her clients, but she'd seen me talking about it and she wanted to thank me. And then the next thing I knew, she's like dancing on LinkedIn going, I'm going to kick cancer's ass. But you can choose whether to stay visible or not when you're going through something deeply personal like that. But my why on that was that my best friend had died of breast cancer back in 2008, very young. And so I didn't want that. I wanted to raise awareness because I thought, well, if women can catch it early as I did, it means higher
Mm.
survival rates and especially people of color. Like my mum was a doctor, actually. My parents were both doctors. And my mum said that in the Asian community, I'm sort of from the South Asian background, in the Asian community, women especially don't go to the doctors with things like that. If they find something, there's a shame around nakedness and
Hmm.
they won't want to take their clothes off in front of a doctor, especially if they're of the opposite gender. So they will not go until it's like too late, basically, until it's like stage 3 or 4. And my mum said she used to find this as a doctor herself. So part of me speaking out about it was about demystifying that and breaking those taboos and just kind of like, it's fine. And the lady that said she was ashamed that messaged me, she was from the Black community, and
Hmm.
there is a stigma around that as well, for them as well. So we were breaking those taboos and breaking those boundaries, which felt pretty good anyway. But I've had friends saying to me, they were checking themselves as a result of me talking about it. They started checking themselves more frequently, or some of them had never checked themselves, and they're like, "Oh my God, I am checking myself. I'm telling all my girlfriends to check themselves." Now that's going to have an impact, right? And I
Mm.
know women who found things as a result, and they came back to me and they were like, "Thank you so much. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have found this."
Mm. Oh, so powerful. That particular story doesn't directly relate to your business,
No.
but there's a connection there where people in business might go, oh, I've had breast cancer, or my mum had breast cancer, or I lost a friend to breast cancer, or any sort of illness. And it's that
Mm.
connection that brings people together. So for people that are thinking now that maybe they've got a story that's not connected to their business, is there any tips that you can give them on sort of what to share and what not to share?
Only share what you feel comfortable sharing. And it's hard. I say visibility is like a muscle, right? The
Mm-hmm.
more you use it, the easier things get. So if you're not used to being visible, it's a bit like you haven't been training for ages, and your visibility muscles are kind of quite weak, and so you have to kind of build your reps and start light. And so the first step in visibility might, towards visibility, may be talking about your clients and getting them to talk about how fantastic you are. That might be one way of just getting your name out there and talking about the
Mm-hmm.
brilliant work you do. And then the next thing might be, so I gave 3 tips yesterday on a live I did. And another one might be just like going, hey, here's 5 things you might not know about me. And you don't have to go super deep, but like just like it's connection points. It's like you said, connection points. So you could just start about, 5 things you might not know about me. One of them might be that you've got a dog. You, you've never talked about your dog on social media. Now, yes, LinkedIn is not Facebook, and there's always the LinkedIn is not Facebook, police brigade. But actually, there are 40% of people, I think, are pet owners, cat or dog owners.
Uh-huh.
So if that makes you make a connection with someone, somebody goes, oh my God, like I've got a dog as well. And they like you a little bit more because you've got a dog or because you love dogs. Where's the harm in that? You've got a connection point. It's small talk that leads to big talk. But people kind of just, I know when I see someone talking about their dog on LinkedIn, it's like it makes me feel all like warm and fuzzy inside. I don't even own a dog. I want a dog, but I don't
Yeah.
have a dog. My younger son is like he's very sensitive to loud noises and he doesn't like barking and it can make him cry, which I'm sure he'll thank me for saying. But so we do borrow my doggy. So I can't talk about my dog online, but I sometimes talk about Peggy, the dog that we borrow. So she comes and stays with us for a few days at a time, and we can kind of like pretend have a dog. But talking about like little points of it makes you more interesting as a person, right?
Totally.
Makes you more interesting. How else are you going to stand out? If you're a commodity and you have no personality and you're not talking about your work, like why would anyone think about working with you? So, and people also I want to know what people are going to be like to work with. It's the first part of like know, like, and trust is like, don't just talk about your shit. I was like, nobody wants to buy your shit. Nobody wants to buy your shit. They want to know what you would be like and can you help them? Values are really important as well, I think, when we're making a decision with who we want to work with. We want to work with someone who we don't think's a knob, who we don't think's an asshole. You know? And so
Yeah.
you want to know that you're going to enjoy working with this person. So showing up and talking about stuff that makes you mad, stuff that makes you sad, stuff that you love, like show a bit of your person. One of the posts I did while I was going through actually, just after I'd come out of my breast cancer journey, was when Kate Middleton was diagnosed.
Hmm.
As Kate. And, there was a lot of furore about it. And I wrote a piece on LinkedIn about, my heart went out to her, but I was like, this is a really private time for a lot of people. And I just hope that are going to give her that space to be with her family. I understand it from my point of view, right? And I did talk about my journey, but I chose to talk about my journey and she didn't get
Yeah.
a choice. There's no way
No.
she had a choice, right? So I kind of talked about that, and that post just kind of, people loved it. And so you can talk about stuff that's in the news and put your personal spin on it, and that shows your values and shows the kind of human being that you are. I think people want to make human connections in
Yes.
business first and foremost. Especially in this age of AI,
Hmm.
like
I think it's so much more needed right now than ever because of that.
yeah, right. And so that human connection and humanity, I think, not going out of fashion. I think if anything, they're going to be more valued as like and more valuable. So the more human and the more personalized your service and the more human interaction, you should be charging more for that because that's something that makes people very special. When I do brand work with my clients, I work very closely with my clients and I charge a premium for working with me because they get what I say, they get the Armani experience, right?
Mm.
So it is perfectly tailored to them and their business, and they have an incredible amount of input into it. So it's like, can you nip and tweak it there? And they have ultimate control, but that's the Armani, and they come out with that with a brand that they feel really represents them and their business, and they absolutely love because they were a part of that co-creation.
I love that. I love that so much. So, if someone's listening and they really know that they want to step into a much deeper brand to really stop holding themselves back to lean into this, how do people stay connected with you?
LinkedIn is my main playground. So you find me on LinkedIn. That's where I've kind of like minimized the rest of my socials for now and just focusing there. But yeah.
I love that. The link for that will be in the show notes right below. Sapna, thank you so much for coming and sharing not just your tips today, but your story as well, and how that has shaped you and your business and your brand, because we've been able to learn through that. And I think that's even more powerful than just here's 5 steps and follow these, because people can see themselves in that and think, you know what? I can do it. I can do this too. So thank you so
You
much.
definitely Definitely. Thank you. Actually, what I was going to say, Samantha, I forgot to say was if anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn and say that they heard this podcast, I'm very happy to send them a free PDF copy of my book, Let's Get Visible, which does have those steps to building your brand. But that's as a gift to your listeners.
I love that so much. So again, we'll pop those links below. Definitely reach out, connect with Sapna and get a copy of that book. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.